here I'm continuing with my jacket, and we're doing the vents that happen on the side. So this is just how I do my jackets, starting this side and kind of working that way. So first is just to check that the lining and the side seam are actually matching. Because I cut like a bit of a cowboy, sometimes, or actually most of the time, my lining is going to be a little bit bigger. So I just check that it's there and I trim it down. It's a bit of a fine balance between too tight and too loose. You do want it a bit loose so it can move, but not so loose that it creates folds. So trim that down, and then I'm going to pin and stitch my side back. Here I'm going to stitch only up until the top of the vent. You'll see why now. And it's basically because I've got two different shapes here. The back shape, you can see, is just very straight. It's going to fold in like that. And then the front shape is this angle, or this nice little curve. So I stitch that just to the top of the vent. On the lining, I have not started pinning it. I'm going to do that in a second. I think that one is already pinned. So it's on the lining. Let's see, right sides together. Matching my waistline. So, this back panel, I could pre-cut properly the shape of the vent. I don't, because that's just how I roll. And like I'm so used to this method, for me to now form another method would make me even crazier than I already am. So, okay, here we're going. I do also 2 centimeter seam allowance on my lining, just so that, if I have to adjust, I have the same amount of seam allowance on the lining as I do on my jacket. So here I'm checking that this is more or less straight with the bottom, or with the hem. I'm going to pin a little bit further down there, and I'm just going to mark a centimeter down from where the bend starts, and I'm just going to stitch to there. So stitching will happen, and of course ironing will obviously happen. So the first thing you do once you've sewn that is you just check that you have actually sewn right sides together, not wrong sides together like a braid. So that I'll be redoing. I'll show you on this one. Here I just put 2 notches in there so that I can fold this lining out. So this portion on the underflap, that's just going to go that way with the fabric. This one on the back portion of the flap, I just iron that 2 centimeter seam allowance, just so I have a line there where the seam allowance is. Here on the garment side, I open this, and here, you can stretch that out if you want to fold that back. I stretch and put a notch just because I don't like stretching so much. And you can also iron these seam allowances one side. A lot of people do that. I'm not a fan. I like having it open here. And now you'll see, I'm going to line this up. Let me just have my 5 centimeter turn up there. I'm going to line this, line the hem up so that that portion is straight there. And you'll see here, these seam allowances are not really going to match. Let's see, this one should be 5 centimeters. Like 4 and a bit, 475. So you'll see with that lining up, see here, these 2 straight edges don't line up. And that's just because, this shape is going that way, this shape is going this way. So if I'd forced that, or if I just stitched it without double checking, it would create a bit of a weird bubble there, and my vent would not lie nice and flat. So I can just observe there to see what is the mismatch that I need to do. And I'll double check it on the other side. But basically, I just need to mismatch those seams up there so that the hem can lie nicely. I don't know if this is something you can actually fix with patterning, or you just have to do once you get down here. Right, then I'm going to put a centimeter seam allowance on the bottom one. I'm not going to go all the way because I need to put my lining onto this portion. So I'm going to go about halfway, maybe 2 centimeters back. And here I'm going to curve that so that I don't have a corner there. There's not a lot of tension here on the vent, so no one will really die having a corner there. But it's just good practice not to put a corner on those edges. So we're going to check this one out now. So the same story, and I just double check. Let's get that out of the way. So this one's also why I like a straight line there because it gives me a good measure. So it's like 4 3/4. That must turn up 5. And that must be straight there. Which means this curved one is going to be a little bit higher. And I check it on this. Yeah, that is correct. Curved one a little bit higher. So I just make sure that I don't force that piece straight because then it will not be fashion. And same story, obviously, stitch about half, and I just curve that in and give myself a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So I'm going to go do that. Obviously, I'm going to correct this lining that I put upside down, and then we'll carry on. So here you can see I've ironed this, my 5 centimeter turn up. You'll see here that the edge here doesn't match very perfectly, so I'm just going to trim that so that it does match nicely. And I'm just going to notch on the corner there. You see I ironed that back, the 4.75 centimeters, and just checked here that this gives me one nice straight line there. But we don't have a corner there, we have a nice round, which is meaning that there's no tension in that one place. So with that done, all of my prep is done on that side. So I now want to attach this portion of the vent first, right sides to right sides. So I'm just going to, in a way, flip it around like this. And you see this is why we didn't stitch all the way for this vent, because we need to get here and stitch this. I stitched this about 3/4 centimeter seam allowance, something like that. This is also why I make sure that my patterns are matching so that I know where to match that portion there. So then here at the bottom, just this lining I know is turning up 2.5 centimeters. So I'm going to make sure that it's straight this way, even though that edge there isn't straight on the line, you see, like that, but that would then cause my lining to be skewed. So I'm going to turn up 2.5 centimeters. This is going to turn up on that notch. And this one, because we trimmed it, it should now be gleich with this one. And there we are. So I'm just going to stitch that between 0.5 centimeter and 1 centimeter, depending how I feel. So you see I've ironed that, stitched that and ironed that. Obviously pushing the lining a little bit this way so we don't see the lining on that side. First thing you need to do is check that you have enough of this portion of the vent from the back sticking out over here, because we need to be able to sew this lining onto here. So if the seam allowance has been too small and it's sticking over there, it's going to be a problem. So then you just stitch the seam allowance a little bit bigger so it can come back. You can get to this portion. Now over here, you can either by machine or by hand just do a stitch to lock this lining from, over time falling out there. Obviously, you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that by hand. And then we're going to stitch this lining. Now you'll see here, the lining and the turn up of the hem is gleich like this. That's fine. Here, not so much. Stop judging me. Don't know what happened there. So, obviously you just have to be aware of that and make sure that I don't force it into some funny position that it doesn't want to be in. So I'm just going to pull this basting out. And then from inside here, I'm going to match the seam. So the lining is always a little bit bigger, as I said, so you can shift around a little bit, give you a bit of movement. So I do need to put a bit of gather in here as I'm going. So let's do the easy part first, which is this side. Now, I don't know if there's some fun, fancy technique to stitch this all the way to the edge. Maybe if we stitch this first and then do the vent, I don't know. But at the moment, how I do, I just stitch as far as I can by machine. And if I feel there's too much of a hole there, you see, this is actually fine. Like, I'll be able to stitch there, won't be a big hole. Here in the front, it's a bit different because, this portion is already caught by hand onto the horsehair. So it becomes a little bit fiddly to get in there. So there, the portion that I can't reach by machine, I'm just going to finish up by hand. That is how I do. You see this one, I'm then just going to slowly ease it up to be equal with the turn up of the hem. Now I'm just going to sew, about a centimeter seam allowance, and then I'll stop around there, and then I'll just judge from the right side if that hole needs closing or not. Alright, so there you can see, just did a bit of a prick stitch there to hold the lining in place. Stitched that by machine, and then I got in here and just herringbone stitched that hem up so that it's not going to collapse down there ever. So that's that. It is a bit fiddly to do that from the inside here. So sometimes I'll first herringbone stitch that and then stitch this lining by hand. Depends. I will be doing that on the center back just because it's my method. So here in the center back, I'm going to start with finishing up this corner and making that a letter edge before I put the lining on. So first thing I do is I just check with my eyes that this is reasonably straight. And we should be seeing here about 4.5, because my turn up is 5. Now of course this I actually want to be just that slight bit longer. So if I turn this up at 4.5, that's actually going to be perfect. So I'm going to start by just ironing that up, and then we're going to come and do the letter edge. Okay, letter edge time. So we've got our corner there. We've got our hem there. And we've got our vent here. So I need a parallel line from the hem at the same width as the hem, which I know is 4.5, and at the same width as the vent, which I know is 4.75. And here's my intersection. Basically, if that folds up, where does it cross? And then from this point, perpendicular with the hem down to the edge. From this point, perpendicular with the vent down to the edge. And you connect the edge to the corner, edge to the corner. And we just sew that up. And those two lines really help to check it out right there. Okay, my pins have moved. So obviously I'm just going to stitch that right into the corner. I'll trim this down, not all of it. I'll leave maybe a centimeter and just iron it neatly and flip it around. Here is our letter edge. There's the front vent. So this is maybe not the best way to do it, but it's the way that I know. So see, I ironed this that I know that is on the edge there. Now I know that my vent there is 4 3/4, and I need 2 centimeters of seam allowance because I need one for the lining, one for the coat. So it's going to be 3, 2.5. All right, 4 3/4. No, 2 3/4. So 2 3/4 is where I'm going to cut. So I'm going to cut that up, cut that up. Now here where I stop stitching, make sure that that's nice and flat. There I want an extra centimeter. And I'm now going to line that up. I'm just going to feel here with my hands, where is that corner? There it is there. So yeah, that should be, because remember we stitched 1 centimeter below. There's my corner there. So I should be, if I measure correctly, 2 centimeters, and that should then line up more or less with this, because it's one, we stitched to 1 centimeter below. There it is. Now we're having an extra centimeter seam allowance. Measured that a little bit short. There's my extra centimeter seam allowance, and 2 3/4. So here I'm going to cut out this little portion. Before I do, I'm just going to use my ruler to draw up a centimeter up and back, because this point is actually where I'm going to stitch, and I just want to double check that if I stitch it there, it is actually catching. So now that I've got that, I'm going to cut this out. And yeah, like I said, obviously I could organize this on the pattern. I'm just so used to doing it this way that. Now then here I'm going to cut up. I'm not going to go all the way to that edge there. Cut up maybe to about so. All right, then I'm going to check everything is lining up. Now, the way that my patterns work is that the lining is flush with the end of the jacket when the fold is up. That's why when I folded it, it's, this is 5, this is 2.5. So I'm going to line that up, and then just in a way, flip this back, and then come and stitch it here. So the reason I do that is because here there's no mark stitching. Obviously here I can see it, but you know, I might accidentally stitch it down there like a madman. I don't know. But anyway, so that's how it goes. I'm going to line it up there. And I'm just going to double check when I flip it open. Yeah, that's clashed there. So that's fine. Going to pin this, and I'm going to stitch just up to that corner where I cut. Here I know I have to fold that 2.5 so that it's equal with the turn up or the hem. And here I'm just going to tuck that in, because at the end of the day, like this, it's not bad. The one disadvantage of that, so when you flip it here, you have this little edge sticking out there. Very unfashionable. What I usually do is I just fold this like so, stitch there, and then you know that gives you like a nice neat edge, and that raw edge is tucked in. I'm just going to do it how I usually do it, which is to flip this up, and then just corner that. Yeah, there we go. So I'm just going to stitch that up. I actually don't think I really need to explain anything else. I'm going to stitch that. This portion, you know, you can, if you really extra, get in here and stitch that by machine. Obviously, you know what's going to happen. I'm going to stitch that by hand. Just close that, stitch it by hand, and I just do a prick stitch like this, so it looks like a style. And then this side, I just do a bit of a stitch through here, so that these two are not, you know, they're not shifting like that. They're really held nicely in place. And there you have it. There is the most fashionable vent you ever saw in your whole entire life. Good, Gila.